Welcome to Health Tech Heroes, where we talk to innovators who are rewriting the DNA of healthcare. Today, we are excited to welcome Dr. Asif Ali, a distinguished cardiologist, academic leader, and medtech innovator from Houston, Texas. Dr. Ali serves as Chief Medical Officer at Tabia Health, Director of SINA Research Institute, and a member at the American Heart Association, where he provides fractional advisory services to numerous health tech companies. His expertise spans cardiovascular medicine, clinical research, and health technology innovation. With these impactful roles, Dr. Ali is at the forefront of integrating technology and healthcare. Welcome to Health Tech Heroes, Dr. Ali.
Thank you so much, Faisal. Thank you so much for the invitation. Really appreciate it.
And I am just thrilled to have you over here, and I think it's going to be a great podcast session, Dr. Ali.
I hope so. I'm very passionate about the things we work on and look forward to having a chat with you about it.
So you're a leader in both cardiovascular medicine and health technology. Each one of them takes a lifetime. What key experiences shaped your unique career path?
Yeah, so I think it always starts with a good story. So I have a good one for you. When I was a medical student at University of Texas, McGovern here in the Texas Medical Center in Houston, Texas, I bumped into my mentor actually at midnight in an elevator in the medical school. And that gentleman ended up being Fareed Murad, Dr. Murad, who won the Nobel laureate in nitric oxide. So he won a Nobel laureate. And he said, "Do you know who I am?" I said, "Of course, you are Dr. Murad, and schools kind of named it, parts with your name on it, and an honor to meet you." And he said, "Well, why don't you come and meet me in my office and let's have a chat?" And it doesn't matter if it's midnight or 6 a.m. If a Nobel laureate says you take the meeting, you take the meeting. So I got to meet with him. And what he asked me is, "What are you doing in life?" And I said, "Well, tomorrow morning, I'm trying to pass my biochem. But other than that, I'm trying to become a cardiologist because, my father had trained under Denton Cooley and DeBakey, who are the first doctors in the world to do a heart transplant. And I was very fortunate to grow under the shadows of Denton Cooley. Used to go to his ranch as a kid and was just very enamored how doctors and cardiologists were innovating in their fields and really doing what's called the leapfrog. And so getting back to Fareed Murad, when I told him I want to be a cardiologist, he actually started to yawn. And he said, and at that time I said, "Well, I better really ask him what I should be doing." And he said, "Look, you really should go get a master's in public health and understand what public benefit companies are. How do you start innovating to improve population health and other humans' lives?" And that's what I did. I took it under a mission, life mission, to really figure out not how to build better or efficiencies in billing practices. That's not what I'm interested in healthcare. I'm actually interested in how do we look at public benefit as a whole and improve on that by using and leveraging technologies. And I've spent last dozen years and over 12 startups, raised a lot of capital in some, and have helped really innovate in different fields, from sudden cardiac death in athletes, where I helped get one of the first bills passed in the nation to screen kids using EKGs to reduce the risk of sudden cardiac death. So you've heard of athletes playing sports and dying when they play sports. Well, I helped get a bill to help support screen those kind of patients, to creating a defibrillator so that actually if someone's heart does stop, to restart it. So how do you innovate in making defibrillators easier and more accessible? And then a very important part in all of these startups is not just the public benefit portion of it, but also the part is being equitable, making sure social determinants of health, inclusivity are very important. So it's not that we're creating technologies for some, but technologies that can really expand to all types of people and that it's accessible to all those type of people. To give you just some examples of some of the works we've done.
Again, that might have taken a lifetime for a lot of people, and you have already achieved so much.
Oh, thank you. I'm very humbled.
So you mentioned equitable, especially with the SINA Research Institute, where you're working towards equity. And what was that point of inspiration or emotional change that happened? Dr. Ali?
Yeah, I think that started very early on when I was in medical school. I noticed around me, Houston has one of the largest diversities in the nation. So if you look at the Houston population over 7 years ago, minorities are a majority in Houston. So our ecosystem is very developed with many different types of cultures and different types of people. And when I was in medical school, when I looked around my cohort of students, I did not see a reflection of the city that I belonged to. I did not see the diversity that I expected. And I actually brought this up to the dean. And the dean said, look, you need to be more involved. And I said, I'm here to be involved. And it was an unpaid position, but it was being on the admissions committee. And to be able to make change, you have to have a seat at the table. So I asked for a seat at the table and I got a seat at the table, and I was an advocate for not for any one specific race or gender, but more so that we really need to make sure that we fund the best, but also make sure that the best have a seat at the table and are included. And then when the advent of AI came out, it's not that AI is racist or is biased. AI just takes what exists out in the market and replicates that. And so when I flew to, for example, just to give you some examples, Louisiana, and I went to Tulane University, I talked about calling out guardrails and to make sure that we're being very cautious when we're bringing new technologies around that. And then in November of last year at the 100-year American Heart Association scientific sessions, where there's tens of thousands of cardiologists that fly in, it's the largest heart association in the world. My team from CINA Research Institute, which also stands for Clinical Research Inclusivity, we presented a paper looking at digital wearables. So we're talking about the red, infrared, and green light, and that's called PPG. So that's looking at how these lights penetrate your skin to collect data. Well, we were one of the first to publish as an oral abstract and published in Circulation. That's the name of the paper. It's one of the highest levels that you can publish in. We called out the wearables that we looked at how these different frequencies that you see on your watches and also pulse oximeters. So just to let you know, during COVID, in darker skin tones, there were monitors called oximeters, pulse oximeters. So you may know these are devices that go on your finger to let you know what your oxygen status was. Well, during COVID, there were many people who were darker skin tones where these devices, when you put them on, were not accurate. So that means that they had less oxygen, but the devices did not pick up the term is hypoxic, or they had less oxygen. So that's terrible. That means that in a certain cohort of patients or people or population who had darker skin tones, some of the devices did not work on them. And because of that, they didn't get life-saving oxygen. So we were one of the first, I believe, to present a paper and publish a paper calling out disparities of health based on your skin tone. And the conclusion we showed, and it's called the Fitzpatrick scale, it goes from 1 to 6, 6 being darker skin tones. CINA Research Institute conducted a study to look at how these wearables did with different skin tones. And yes, we found the darker the skin tone, the less reliable some of these light-based wearable devices were able to pick up the data that they were supposed to pick up. And my conclusion statement was that if you're going to sell to people of different skin tones, then you better include them in the studies and in the research that you do before you start selling to people of different skin tones. And that paper got published last year and was published and also an oral abstract at the American Heart Association. And so now we're partnering and working with different companies that are collecting data on different skin tones and making sure that we create the guardrails and the standard of care so that when you do purchase a digital wearable, when you do go purchase a device, that it works on all skin tones and all people. And I think we've been talking about that since I was in medical school, and we've been very consistent with that message throughout, whether it's going to Tulane University and talking about AI and guardrails, or it's literally looking at big digital wearable companies and making sure that those companies are being adherent to the populations that they're selling to.
So what you're working on is not to make people aware that there is inequity, is to fix it in the inherent system. At Sina Research Institute, you're actively working on social aspect of that. You're changing the technology to address inequities. Was that a coincidence, or was what it was planned that C Research Institute and clinical research inclusivity was a coincidence, or that was planned?
No, that was very coincidental. In fact, I was trying to describe it to someone in Chicago at the American Heart Association, and I said, wow, Sina Research Institute also stands for Clinical Research Inclusivity, and it was done very on accident. But I do want to make sure that the individuals listening to this podcast understand that traditionally there's a big underrepresentation of different skin tones, of females, especially obesity and elderly population. These are very underrepresented populations in health technology. And if you look at where we're going with artificial intelligence, which is really machine learning models, if you only test your models on algorithms that don't represent the general population. For example, I think it's very well known in EKGs, which is the electrocardiogram, that there's very big hubs of information and data out there. But that data was collected mainly on 60, 65-year-old white males. So if you're going to train your models on the registries that are out there, but those registries don't represent the population that you're going to sell to, then we have a big problem. So what we're saying in our research institute is we're not pointing the finger, we're trying to create the guardrails to make sure that the data that you're collecting represents the population that you're going to sell to. And the point is, don't sell to a population unless you've included them in your algorithms and your research before you go to market. So we want to make sure that we set the tone and we set the standards of what the bar needs to be. And we're working with bigger organizations to be able to do that. It's not just from us, but someone has to go and do the research and actually publish the data to set the scale and the tone and explain what the problem is. See, it's all about asking the right question. And I think what we're doing is making sure we're asking the right question.
Ali, you said that their elderly populations are less represented and obese population is less represented in the clinical trial. When you're designing clinical trial, we tend to take healthier population within the impacted population so that the risk to the patients on an experimental drug is quite low. And I understand the part of having women and people of color is an issue. We can directly address that. But when it comes to people who might have a lot of comorbidities or are at high risk, how do we address that population? How do we get them into a clinical trial safely?
Yeah, so I think part of it is actually health literacy. So it's making sure that we address different types of people with different messaging that resonates with them. And we can just go back to the Tuskegee trials where African Americans and syphilis, there's no doubt why there would be hesitancy and a lack of trust. And I think trust is something that has to be earned, and it has to be procured, and it has to be dealt with in a certain way. And that's really where health literacy comes into play. So making sure that we understand the psyche of the individual that we're addressing. It's not a one fit all questionnaire. We have to make sure that when we are addressing individuals, we do it with respect and we do it with clarity and transparency. And we do it at a tone and at a level of education that the individuals who are going to be part of this understand. So I just had talked at actually Life Science Institute, LSI, around creating an additional layer, for example, in not only in research, but even in selling products like digital health products, that we really understand the psyche of the individual. We understand the behavior of those individuals and to better message to those individuals. People may have different love language. Some people may be visual. Some people may be very linear. Some people may be, want to have a broader discussion, or they need more hand-holding. Some people need certain data presented a certain way. So having that psychological sort of profile to understand what's the best way to message to the individuals, we don't do that a lot. It's a lot of just, here's one form, fill it out, try to understand it. Some people may need different approaches to that, and that's really where health literacy and understanding the individual that you're talking to, earning that trust and having that high level understanding and conversation around that and being able to answer questions in a very transparent way. I think those are very important. That's really what I think Cena Research Institute really strives for. And you had asked a little bit question before, why did we even, where did this whole Cena Research Institute come from? And, we had been really mentoring students from all over Texas, both from undergrad to graduate levels, so from UT A&M, U of H, HBU, so many different organizations. Students were coming to us, and we were really publishing really amazing papers around cardiovascular care. And what we ended up finding is the populations that we were trying to get in the students were also underrepresented students. So a lot of females who are different, skin tones, who may not be the first to get into STEM projects because they just didn't have the opportunities. And we also started looking at inner city organizations, and we started talking to Phi Beta Kappa, which were looking at who are the valedictorians and the really, the kids who are coming from inner city schools. We were really interested in helping those individuals procure relationships with Cena Research and really develop some really great research opportunities. And a lot of these kids are going from inner city, their first generation to even go to college. And then many of these kids are going to Ivy League organizations because they're just amazing kids, but they didn't necessarily have the resources or opportunities to get research. And as you know, to be competitive nowadays, you have to have some research opportunities. So we try to not only represent in our population of patients underrepresented, but also the individuals in our ecosystem of students and interns who are also underrepresented. I can give you an example. We had an individual from University of Houston who had just graduated, and she's a Hispanic female, first one in her family to go to college, paid through herself for college. And it was very interesting because I remember doing a study where the study precluded individuals if they did not speak English. So it meant that I'm recruiting patients, but one of the exclusion for the patient is if they couldn't speak English. And why? Because that study group did not have anyone on their group that spoke Spanish or Hindi or Urdu or Vietnamese, which there's a big population in the state of Texas as well as Houston that actually only perhaps speak those languages. So that individual, for example, the Hispanic intern who was working with us and still working with us, was able to tell that organization, well, I'm going to be under Dr. Ali as the PI, and I'm going to be working with him, and I can translate all of your materials, and I will be there every day with the patients. And then they allowed people who spoke Spanish to be part of that study. And believe it or not, over 50% of the patients that we recruited were Spanish speaking. And because of that intern, that's why they were able to be included into that study. So see, again, I'm showing you that the company wasn't biased, but there are inherent biases by not allowing individuals who cannot be consented in a language outside of a language that may not be their first language. And by the way, even if they did speak English, from a consent standpoint, and again, this goes back to health literacy and health equity, being able to speak in a language that they understand more. Yes, they could, a lot of them spoke English and Spanish, but they understood Spanish better because that was their first language, and therefore consenting them in the language that they're more apt to understand is very important to us at Cena Research Institute, and very important that they were included in the study. And they would have been excluded had my intern not stood up and said, hey, I'm willing to be able to be part of this program and make sure that everyone understands what they're signing up for.
Dr. Ali, I'm going to take this story with me. I'm going to share it wherever I get an opportunity, because what I see is sometimes we take complex problems and we think the solutions are going to be incredibly complex too. Sometimes it's a matter of addressing the pain point with such simple solutions, and remarkable from 0 to 50% increase in
It's remarkable.
the
And how amazing that so many people from that ethnicity would have been excluded from the study, surely because we couldn't communicate. And communication, I think, is fundamental to being human. And we have to find better ways to communicate effectively, whether it's to a patient or just to an individual, to a family member. And some of the projects that we're working on, and we get this quite a bit, if we can kind of shift the conversation around AI, because that seems to be sort of the hot topic these days. And I just, did a talk around this. I'm a co-founder of a organization in Houston called Houston AI. So Houston AI is the trifecta of oil, gas, energy, space, and medicine. So I was chairing the medicine part. And I began that talk around AI saying that when computers came out, when computers initially came out, we were very afraid of computers. We said, oh my God, computers are going to take our jobs. But obviously, computers didn't take our jobs. They actually helped create a lot of jobs, and they actually helped us augment what we do today, made us more efficient, sometimes actually even more busy because we're more accessible and there's emails come 24/7, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we can argue whether computers made our lives better or busier or more efficient. So there's, two sides of the coin with anything that we do. So the same thing with AI. There's always this conversation around, is AI going to take our jobs? And I think the statement I made was, or I know the statement I made was, AI, for example, it was said that AI is going to take the jobs of doctors, just to give an example in medicine, and you could extrapolate this in many different industries. And the statement I said is AI will not take the doctors' jobs, but it's the doctors who use AI are going to have a competitive advantage to the doctors who don't use AI. So it's the same thing like computers. If you're not using computers, you're going to be at a disadvantage. It's not that computers taking your job, but if you don't leverage what the computers are offering you, the same thing with AI, artificial intelligence, which we could also say machine language models. But if you don't leverage what the opportunities there are with AI, and definitely there's a utopia and a dystopia of anything that we work on. So any technology, there can be good and bad. And what I'm saying is, in your industry, whatever that industry is, it could be oil, gas, it could be space, it could be medicine, it could be anything, teaching, it could be education. It's really the KOLs, the key opinion leaders, the people who are really in the space, and everyone else who are in that space really need to dictate how we utilize those technologies. And if we don't participate, and if we're not participating in the space, whatever that space is for you with AI, then other people are going to use that. So we all need to have a voice in how we're leveraging these tools. And what we're doing, and I think that goes kind of a transition into what you had mentioned about me being part of Tabia. So Tabia, the actual word in Swahili means behavior. And the best way to get individuals to improve their health is to adhere treatments. You don't get outcomes if you have the same behavior. If you have poor behavior like smoking or lack of exercise or not taking care of your blood pressure or your sugars, then you're going to have a certain trajectory. So the point is how do we leverage AI to help improve, to communicate, to improve behavior change? And that's what Tabi is. That's just one example of looking at how do we use AI in a more utopia or in a more fruitful way to help individuals, going back to my initial statement, which is I'm only interested in public benefit companies. How does this benefit individuals? And that goes back to my mentor, Fareed Murad, challenging me as an individual on how do you really look at as population health and improving the public benefit. One of those companies is Tabia, which means behavioral change. And how do we create behavioral change to benefit the populations that we're working in?
So this brings me to the next question. As you are in part of health technology wing of AHS and you're in the advisory board, what is the advice you'd give to the health tech companies right now? What to do and what not to do when it comes to healthcare?
Sure. So to frame that, I am on the Health Tech Advisory Board for the American Heart Association. The American Heart Association is the largest cardiology to the heart, and heart disease is the number one killer in America. So we're interested in saving lives. And for health tech companies, there's a lot of issues that we still have, that cardiovascular is still the number one cause for death in worldwide. Hypertension is still an issue. Obesity is still an issue. Diabetes is an issue. Lack of sleep, too much lack of exercise, and too much stress. There's so many just more lifestyle issues. There's health equity issues. There's social determinants of health issues. But the challenge I think we have is to start with the right question. What problems are we trying to solve? And then the second part is not to just throw out ideas, but you have to vet those ideas. Just like pharmaceutical companies have to go through processes, same thing. We should have the same level of integrity for any device that's going to come out, whether it's a diagnostic device, a wearable device, a digital device, a software as a service device, because that is also a device. Anytime we're collecting data and trying to make decisions on patient care, then it needs to fundamentally start with academia, asking the right question, finding the right solution, and then going through the rigors of publishing that data and making sure that the populations we're studying are inclusive of the populations that you're going to sell to. And once those publications and inclusivity and making sure the individuals are all included, then publishing that data and then commercializing. I mean, and that's fine. And staying narrow within the data that you've collected, and narrow in the populations that you're going to sell to. So I think it always starts with asking the right question, answering it through academic solutions and inclusivity of who you're including and excluding in that population, and then creating your product and then go to market. In that order, what I see sometimes is companies trying to go to market and not really getting down into the academics. And you could always say, well, what's the harm of that? I think we just talked about that with pulse oximeters not being vetted and not having the inclusivity and inclusion criteria of different skin tones. And what's the danger there is when you need to use that device and it hasn't been vetted on all the different types of skin tones, then you may create an issue where individuals are not getting proper care based on the data that you're collecting.
One question before the last question, being sensitive to your time. This is more to do with your leadership skills and you as a leader, not considering the technical part of it, but just the leadership part of it. What do you think is the most critical skill set a leader should have for the next generation of health tech leaders? What is that one critical thing you think is non-negotiable for a leader to be successful and also make sure that we ensure that patients have an optimal outcomes?
Yeah. I wish I had one word for it. I mean, I think it's communicating effectively, and communication doesn't just mean the oral representation of words. It's also you communicating with the questions and the answers that you're trying to elicit. So that could be communicating with the C-suite of a digital wearable company. And to be able to do that, you have to become a subject matter expert. You have to go deep. You cannot go superficial. So you really have to know your subject, and you have to know it well, and you have to become a leader in that area. You cannot answer all the questions. In fact, on the questions I try to answer are very narrow in scope, and I go very, very deep in that. But when you go deep in that, then you can communicate all the nuances that might come from that particular pathology that you're trying to solve. So I think it's really being honest with yourself and making sure you're a subject matter expert. And the truth is in the data and the science. And so you need to be able to really understand all of that data and all of that science. And again, by understanding that, then you can ask the right questions and come up with the right solutions, and then being able to communicate that and understand your audience, because you got to be able to communicate that from the individuals using it to the individuals producing it. It can be the engineers, it can be the C-suite, it can be the CFO, but you got to be able to communicate from end to end and even to peers, and then understand how do you actually get that paid for? Because at the end of the day, ideas are ideas, but you also have to understand both the academics and the commercialization. And that's really where I sit in between. Really do understand the academics, but also what are the commercial opportunities? Because someone ultimately has to pay for all the academia that you brought to the table.
Thank you very much for the key points. Communication, don't go too wide, answer a narrow one, but go deep into it. Make sure you communicate that depth and have a balance between commercial and academics. Make sure that you are addressing the right questions, right pain points, and make sure you are commercializing the right pain points. These are going to be really key. I will try to highlight this. Just these three points that you have made is going to make or break an entrepreneur who is going to get into health tech industry. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Ali. What is some message that you think is super critical for you to reiterate, or something that we actually missed during this podcast? If you have a last message for my audience and for me, that'll be amazing, Dr. Ali.
Sure. No, so first of all, thank you so much for having me on today. And I appreciate the opportunity to really voice some of the things that I'm passionate about, which is in digital health, in AI, in cardiology, again, addressing some of the most critical areas of healthcare today. Heart disease is still the #1 killer in America. And so we still have a long way to go in regards to moving the needle. We have a lot of cause and effect of heart disease, so addressing everything from diabetes to obesity to hypertension, and even lifestyle modifications like lack of exercise, lack of sleep, and too much stress, air quality, sleep apnea, so many different factors, hyperlipidemia, that create a milieu of issues in regards to your heart. So making sure we really address everything from lifestyle to even pathologies like we talked about. And I think where AI and machine learning models, as well as we move forward into technology, is making sure that it's accessible to all, that we have health, we call out the health inequities and the biases that exist, and we create guardrails around those. That we make sure that we're inclusive in the data that we're collecting, especially when we deal with research, and that we are able to address to individuals using health equity and social determinants of health, and really making sure we create trust and partnerships with the individuals that we're collecting that data, and also being very transparent how we're using that data, how we share that data, and make sure that we actually give back to those individuals that are giving of themselves to be able to participate to improve humanity. At the end of the day, we're really focused on public benefit companies, what really benefits individuals, and that has to start with vigorous academic research that then translates into commercial opportunities, but has to be very founded in academia as the base. The science and the data always wins, but we need to also make sure that we address all the inequities and the social determinants of health that we talked about. And then lastly is just really that health literacy, because if we don't communicate effectively to the individuals that we're collecting that data, then we may end up excluding them. And then making sure we meet all the stakeholders at their level, whether it's the level of their education, or it could be differences in how we address individuals, for example, youth or older individuals, then also in the language that they're comfortable receiving that data, and not excluding people because they don't meet the criteria of language barriers as well. I think we can do better, and I think that's where artificial intelligence can help. And then lastly, with AI, I believe there's opportunities looking at different signals, different data, and how does that data intersect to improve those individuals' lives. And at the end of the day, that's really what it is. It's all about improving quality of life and improving healthcare in population health, as well as down to the individual. Again, thank you so much for having me on today, and really appreciate the opportunity to address inclusivity in our patient cohorts, and the ability to really address social determinants of health and what Cena Research Institute stands for, which is clinical research inclusivity.
And thank you very much, Dr. Asif. I was honestly thinking we'll talk more about TABIA, but we ended up talking about CRI more. It seems like, and legitimately so, it is a topic that is closest to your heart, and it was such an amazing talk, and my mind is blown. So thank you very much for that.
Thank